He stood at my front door on a Tuesday afternoon, and I remember thinking how small he looked. Not physically. He was the same size he had always been, but something about him had collapsed inward. The confidence was gone. The easy smile that had made him the life of every dinner party, every neighborhood barbecue, every school event, gone. He looked like a man who had been wearing a mask for so long that when someone finally pulled it off, he didn't know what his own face was supposed to do. He wanted to talk. He wanted to explain himself. He had things he needed to say. I looked at him for a long moment. Behind him, across the street, I could see the house where the four of us had shared so many meals, so many late nights, so many moments that I had genuinely believed would be part of the fabric of my life forever. I thought about everything that had happened in the past 5 months. I thought about the day I found out. I thought about lying face down on my couch, unable to move, unable to breathe, while my wife sat nearby and explained, calmly, almost clinically, that she had fallen in love with my best friend and that their plans were already made. I thought about all of that, and then I said the only thing that felt honest. There is nothing you could say to me that would matter right now. Not one word. And I closed the door. But to understand why closing that door felt like the first full breath I had taken in months, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back to the version of me who would have opened it. My wife, I'll call her Claire, and I had been together for 11 years at that point. Married for 8 of them. We had 2 kids, a house, a life that looked exactly like what you worked toward when you were young and optimistic and full of plans. I'm not going to tell you it was a perfect marriage, because no marriage is, but it was a real one. It was built on something solid, or at least I believed it was. Mark and Sarah moved in across the street from us about 4 years before any of this happened. We clicked with them almost immediately. The kind of rare connection where you meet another couple and within a month, it feels like you have known them for years. Our kids were the same ages. Our sense of humor lined up. We started having dinner together a few times a week without even planning it. It just became the rhythm of our lives. Vacations together, holidays together, inside jokes that stretched back years. I genuinely saw Mark as a brother, not in a casual, throw-the-word-around way. I mean the kind of friendship where you would drive 4 hours in a storm without asking why if he called and needed you. Mark was a talker, a charmer. He had this way of walking into a room and making it feel like the room had been waiting for him. He was funny, loud, magnetically likable, and he knew it. That was the thing I noticed early on, but never thought much of. Mark was very aware of the effect he had on people, and he enjoyed it. He'd hold court at the dinner table, working the room like it was his personal audience. When he told a story, everyone leaned in. When he laughed, you laughed too without knowing why. Looking back now, I can see the specific shape of that flaw. It wasn't just confidence. It was something closer to a deep, unshakable certainty that he could talk his way out of anything. That his charm was a kind of currency that never ran out. That people, all people, would always eventually forgive him or bend to him because they always had. That was Mark's real flaw, and it would turn out to be the exact thing that destroyed him. He never believed that consequences were permanent. He believed he could always come back from anything because smiling and talking had always worked before. About 2 years before the affair came to light, Mark ran for a seat on our local board of education. It was a long shot. He was running against a well-established incumbent in a district where nobody knew ever won. And honestly, the rest of us thought it was a bit of a vanity project, something to keep him busy. I helped him anyway, because that is what you do for someone you care about. I helped him design his campaign materials. I sat with him for hours doing debate prep, feeding him questions, telling him when his answers were too long or too vague. And Claire, who was a respected employee in the school district, quietly put the word out on his behalf, vouching for him with people whose opinions carried weight. Mark won, by a handful of votes, fewer than 50, if I remember correctly. He was absolutely electric with excitement the night the results came in. We all celebrated together. I remember feeling genuinely proud of him, the way you feel proud of someone when you had a hand in their success. What I did not think about, what I should have thought about, was that winning that seat was going to change the shape of his daily life in ways I hadn't mapped out. He joined every committee he could. He started attending every school event, every board meeting, every district function. And so did Claire, because of her position in the district. Suddenly, they were spending evenings and weekends together at events that I was not part of, driving to meetings together, sitting on panels together, representing the same institution in the same rooms. I noticed it. I would be lying if I said I didn't. The texting started to become something I was aware of in a way that was uncomfortable without being something I could name. Claire had always been social. She had a big circle of friends, and she texted constantly. It was just how she operated. But somewhere around late summer, it shifted. The phone was always in her hand. At dinner, in the evenings, even when we were all together as couples, she would be looking down. I asked her once, in November, if we could agree to a no phones at the dinner table rule for the sake of the kids. She said yes, but reluctantly, and she would sit through dinner with this quiet, tight expression on her face, like someone waiting to be let out of a room. Within a few weeks, she had stopped following the rule entirely. Sarah noticed too. She mentioned it to me one afternoon, something indirect and careful. She said she felt like Mark and Claire were always in their own world when we were all together. We even brought it up with both of them directly more than once. And both of them looked us in the eyes and told us it was school business. Board stuff, district planning, nothing to worry about. We believe them. I want you to sit with that for a second because it matters. We believe them not because we were naive, but because the mind does something very specific when it is protecting you from a truth it cannot yet absorb. It finds every reasonable explanation and holds on to it. It tells you that you are being paranoid. It tells you that the people who know you best would not do this to you. It tells you to trust the people you love. Looking back, I should have seen it then. The phone rule, the tight expression, the way Claire would laugh a little too quickly when Mark said something across the table, the way she would excuse herself to reply to a text in the middle of a movie night with all four of us in the room. It was right there. All that was right there. I found out on a completely ordinary Tuesday morning. Claire had left her personal email open on the home computer. I was not snooping. I sat down to check something, and it was just there on the screen. And I saw an email addressed to her therapist, a woman she had been seeing for years. The email mentioned that Mark would be joining her for an upcoming session again. That word, again. My stomach dropped before my brain had fully processed why. I sat very still for a moment. Then I started searching. What I found over the next 30 minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about my life. Emails going back 6 weeks showing that Mark had been attending Claire's therapy sessions with her, without my knowledge, without Sarah's knowledge. I pulled up her mobile phone account and looked at the records. Since late summer, the two of them had been exchanging hundreds of text messages every single day. Hundreds. On some days around the holidays, it peaked at close to 500. 500 texts in a single day, between my wife and my best friend. Thanksgiving, Christmas, both holidays that we had hosted at our house, with both of our families present, parents, siblings, children. I thought about those dinners now with a completely different set of eyes. I thought about the way Claire and Mark had both been on their phones that day, and I had just assumed it was normal holiday distraction. They'd been texting each other, across the room from me, across the room from Sarah, with our families around them, with our children running between their legs. They had been building their secret in the middle of the most family-centered days of the year. My hand was shaking by the time I closed the laptop. I sat at the kitchen table and did not move for a long time. I confronted Claire that evening. I had the emails printed. I had the phone records in front of me. I did not raise my voice. I did not know why. I think I was too hollowed out to shout. I just put the papers on the table and waited. She did not deny it. I think the evidence was too clear and she was too tired of carrying it. She told me that she and Mark had fallen in love, that it had happened on a school district trip in her hotel room, and that things had moved quickly from there. She said the word love several times, and each time it landed like something heavy dropped from a height. She told me they had already made plans. They were going to divorce their respective spouses. They were not going to move in together immediately because of the children, but eventually that was the direction things were heading. She told me the therapy sessions, the joint sessions, the ones she had been attending with my best friend without telling me, were about finding the kindest way to break this news to Sarah and me. They were so concerned for our well-being, she said. They had been thinking about us throughout all of this. I lay face down on the couch after she left the room. I could not look at anything. I could not think in a straight line. Everything that had felt solid, the house, the years, the future I'd been building in my head, all of it was rewriting itself in real time, and I could not stop it. I called my friend Danny the next morning. Danny had been my closest friend from college, someone who had known me long before Claire, long before this town, long before any of this. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is something not everyone can do, and when I finished he was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said, "What are you going to do about it?" Not, "I'm so sorry." Not, "That's terrible." He knew me well enough to know that I was already past the grieving phase and into the thinking phase. He was asking the right question. I told him I did not know yet, but I was working on it. Here's what I did know. Mark's position on the Board of Education had been the launching pad for this entire affair. Every committee meeting, every school event, every evening trip, all of it had been covered by the excuse of district business. And now that I was thinking clearly about it, a relationship between a sitting board member and a school district employee was not just socially complicated. It was professionally explosive. District policy on conflicts of interest and relationships between board members and staff exists for a reason. And beyond policy, there was the simple reality of optics, the superintendent, the community, the parents who voted for Mark. None of them would find this acceptable. There was more. Claire had been in the running for a significant promotion, a new administrative position that would come with a major pay raise and a complete change in her professional standing. The superintendent had personally encouraged her to complete her master's degree in school administration, specifically so she could step into this role. Everyone in the district knew the job was hers. It was, as far as anyone was concerned, a done deal. I had evidence. I had printed emails. I had phone records with hundreds of contacts per day documented in black and white. I had the emails to and from the therapist. Any one of those things in the right hands would be enough to change the landscape completely. But I thought carefully about how to use them. If I walked into the superintendent's office as the grieving betrayed husband and dropped a folder on the desk, there was a real risk it would be treated as a personal dispute rather than a professional one. The messenger matters. I needed the information to come out in a way that could not be dismissed or managed quietly. So I made a decision. I would not send the evidence directly. Instead, I told Claire, very carefully, very calmly, that I had heard from a mutual acquaintance who was absolutely furious about the affair. Someone who had found out through the community grapevine. Someone who was so angry that they were planning to show up at the next public board of education meeting and lay everything out in front of the community. I told her I'd try to talk this person down, but I could not promise they would not follow through. I watched her face change as I said it. I watched the calculation happening behind her eyes. She called Mark within the hour. I know because I still had access to the phone account at that point. Mark, to his credit, or rather, to his complete and total lack of judgment, decided that the only way to protect himself from public exposure was to get ahead of it. He called the board chairman that evening and requested an urgent meeting. He went in the next morning and confessed to the affair voluntarily, framing it as him choosing to be transparent rather than waiting for someone else to expose him. He thought he was being strategic. He thought his charm and his willingness to fall on his own sword would earn him credit. He thought he could control the narrative one more time, because controlling narratives was what he did. The superintendent recommended that he resign from board. He did so within 48 hours. Sarah called me the evening after his resignation. Her voice was quiet and careful, the way it had been a lot in those weeks. She had learned to process shock in small, measured doses. She told me that Mark had barely gotten out of bed since it happened, that he had been lying in the dark in the middle of the afternoon, that the man who had never met a room he couldn't own was now unable to face his own neighborhood. Good was all I thought. Good. The consequences for Claire were not far behind. As news of the affair and Mark's resignation began to move through the district, and in a community that size, news moves fast, the superintendent called her. This was a man who had been a professional ally and a personal friend to both of them for years. He called her, and he told her, with what she later described to me as genuine regret, that it was no longer appropriate for her to be promoted to the administrative position. The job that had been hers. The job she had spent years working toward. The job that had been the entire reason she completed her master's degree. Gone. The position was later filled by a candidate from outside the district. The day after she received that call, we took our son out for his birthday breakfast. The three of us sat in a booth at the diner near our house, doing our best to make the morning feel normal for him. And a woman from the school community stopped at our table to congratulate Claire on her new role. She had heard the promotion was happening and had not yet heard that it had fallen apart. Claire smiled and said thank you. Then she excused herself and went to the bathroom. She was gone for a while. When she came back, her eyes were red. I did not say anything. I helped our son eat his birthday pancakes. I let 2 weeks pass after that. 2 weeks of watching the dust settle. 2 weeks of watching the story spread through the neighborhood and the district in the way that stories do in small towns. Not announced, just absorbed, until everyone knows without anyone having made a formal announcement. Mark, who had once been a fixture at every local pub and community event, had effectively disappeared. Claire had stopped talking to me about work, which told me everything I needed to know about what was happening there. Then, a few days before Claire moved out, I told them both the truth. There was no furious friend. There had never been a furious friend. There was no anonymous source threatening to go public. There was only me, just me, sitting in my living room with a phone and a plan and a very clear understanding of how Mark's particular brand of confidence would reply to the threat of public exposure. I had known he would confess voluntarily rather than risk being humiliated in public, because that is what people who are obsessed with controlling their image always do. They would rather choose their own fall than have someone else choose it for them. I had handed him the shovel and told him the ground was already dug, and he had buried himself. I want to be honest with you about something. I did not do this out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I did not want to destroy anyone for the pleasure of it. I was a man who had been blindsided by the two people he trusted most in the world, who had sat at his Thanksgiving table with his family around him and texted each other across the room, who had looked him in the eyes and lied to his face for months. I was a man who had helped Mark get elected. I had spent hours in that man's living room doing debate prep. I had put my own credibility behind his campaign, and he had repaid that by spending every moment of his time in that position building an affair with my wife. What I did was proportional. What I did was use the truth. I did not fabricate a single piece of evidence. I did not lie to the board or the superintendent. Mark walked in and told them himself. I did not destroy anything that was not already built on a foundation of lies. I simply understood the man well enough to know how he would reply to pressure, and I applied it correctly. The aftermath settled slowly, the way it always does in small communities. Mark moved out of the house across the street a few months later, into a small townhouse that was all he could manage after the child support obligations were worked out. The house I had looked at from my front window for 4 years, the house where we had shared so many evenings and so many dinners and so many ordinary moments that I had assumed were permanent, was quieter now. Sarah and I stayed in touch. We were both going through the same earthquake with the same people at the center of it, and having someone who understood that without needing an explanation made the whole thing slightly less impossible. We got the kids together when we could. We checked in on each other. It was not romantic. People always wanted to be romantic, but it was not. It was just two people holding each other upright through something neither of them had chosen. Claire and Mark, to nobody's particular surprise, decided to try to make things work together. I genuinely do not know what to say about that, except that they are welcome to each other. They are two people who burned down two families and two careers in the same fire, and now they're trying to build something in the ash. I do not wish them happiness, but I also do not spend much time wishing them anything at all. What I know is that every time they walk down a street in this town together, people know what they did. And in a place this size, that is a weight you carry every day. I took my kids camping the weekend after all of this finally settled. We drove out to a state park about 2 hours away, set up a tent in the dark because we got there later than planned, ate sandwiches by a fire, and fell asleep to the sound of trees. My youngest asked me if I was happy. I thought about it honestly before I answered, which is something I try to do with my kids. I told him I was getting there, and I meant it. Not in the way people say things like that to sound better than they feel. I meant it because I'd spent 5 months being destroyed by grief and anger and the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from losing your marriage and your best friend in the same moment. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I had also discovered something about myself that I had not known before. I was not someone who laid down and waited for things to happen to him. I was someone who, when pushed to the very edge of what he could tolerate, thought clearly and acted precisely and did not flinch. Mark thought he could charm his way back from anything. He thought the friendship we had built, the years we had shared, the fact that he was likable and social and good at making people feel warm, he thought all of that was a kind of insurance. He thought that even if things went wrong, he could always find his way back. He could always knock on a door and talk his way through it. He knocked on my door. He stood there looking smaller than I had ever seen him. And I closed it, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, out of the quiet, clear understanding that some things, once broken, are not meant to be repaired. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. I keep the phone records. I keep the printed emails. Not because I need them for anything now, but because there's something grounding about having the truth in a physical form. Something that says, this happened, it was real, and you're not crazy for feeling what you felt. The evidence is not a weapon anymore. It is just a record of a chapter that ended the way it needed to end. Here's what I want to leave you with, and I want you to think about this genuinely. Mark had every opportunity to be honest. He had months to come to me as a friend, to tell me the truth, to handle this with even a fraction of the decency that our friendship had supposedly been built on. Instead, he and Claire sat at my dinner table, texted each other across the room from me, and Sarah looked both of us in the eyes when we asked direct questions and lied. They chose the lie repeatedly every single day for months. They did not stumble into this. They built it deliberately in the spaces between the life I thought we were all sharing. So here's the question I want you to sit with. I used the truth as a tool. I understood how Mark thought, and I used that understanding to let him make the choice that exposed him. I never lied to the board, never fabricated evidence, never hurt anyone who was innocent. I simply understood what would happen if I applied pressure in the right place, and I was right. The week before everything finally broke open, Mark came over to borrow my extension ladder. That was how ordinary it still was on the surface. He knocked, I answered, and there he was in my doorway with that easy, broad smile, hands in his jacket pockets, acting like a man who had not spent the better part of a year texting my wife 500 times a day. I went to the garage to get the ladder. He followed me in, uninvited, the way he always had. You know, he said, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching me pull the ladder off its hooks. Claire mentioned you've been a little checked out lately. Distant. You might want to think about that. She worries. My hands went still on the ladder rails. He said the way you'd say something genuinely helpful. Measured. Concerned. The voice of a man dispensing wisdom to someone slightly beneath his level of emotional intelligence. He tilted his head a little when he said it, the same tilt he used at board meetings when he was about to talk over someone. She worries. I stood there with my back to him for a moment, my grip on the cold aluminum tightening until I could feel the edge of the rung pressing into my palm. I thought about every dinner, every holiday, every evening the four of us had spent in those two houses while he and Claire built their secret in real time. I thought about him sitting across from Sarah at my Thanksgiving table, texting my wife under the edge of the tablecloth. And now he was standing in my garage telling me Claire was worried about me. Yeah, I said. I turned around and handed him the ladder. I'll think about that. He took it, smiled again, and left. The smile never wavered for a second. That was the thing that stayed with me. Not anger, not guilt, not even the flicker of something careful behind his eyes. Just the smile. The full, easy, untroubled smile of a man who had never once considered that he might be running out of time. I called Sarah that same evening. We had been talking more by then. Careful, circling conversations where we were both figuring out how much the other person already knew, how much weight they could carry. I told her about the garage, about what he had said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he's done that before. with other people. I waited. There was a woman at his office about 3 years ago. She said, her voice was steady in the way that voices get when someone has already done their grieving about a particular thing and arrived somewhere past it. I don't know how far it went. I think not very far, but I don't actually know. What I do know is that afterward, after I found out there had been something, he told me it was my fault for being emotionally unavailable. Those were his words. He said I'd made him feel invisible and that I needed to think about my role in it. She paused. He made me apologize to him, actually, and I did. I apologized to him. I sat with that. He does it deliberately. She said, when he feels like someone is getting close to the truth or close to confronting him about something, he gets in first. He makes you feel like you're the problem, like you're the one who needs to examine yourself. It takes the pressure off him and it puts you on the back foot. Another pause. I just wanted you to know that, so that if he tries it again, you know what it is. I thanked her and got off the phone and sat in the kitchen for a long time after that. 3 years ago, he had done this before in some form. And when he was cornered, he had turned it around and made Sarah apologize. And she had, because she trusted him. Because that is what you do with the people you trust. You accept their version of the story, you absorb the blame, you try to do better. He had looked me in the eye in my own garage and told me my wife was worried about me. He had tried to make me the problem, again, because it was the only move he had ever needed to make. It was not going to work this time. That night I sat on the back step for a long time after the kids went to bed. The yard was dark. The neighbors' lights were on behind the fence. That ordinary warm yellow glow of people going about their evenings. And I sat there and I thought about nothing for a while, which is different from thinking about everything, even though from the outside it probably looks the same. I had been destroyed. I knew that. I was not pretending I was fine. But something had shifted in me in the garage that afternoon, and I was trying to understand its shape. He had stood in my space. He had used her name. He had delivered his warning with that smile and that head tilt, and he had walked out with my ladder under his arm. And I had let him. I had handed it to him. And for a second, just a second, I had felt the old pull of it. The pull toward self-examination. The pull toward wondering if maybe he had a point. That was the thing. He was so good at it that even knowing what I knew, even with the phone records sitting in a folder in my desk drawer, I had felt it. I thought about Sarah apologizing to him 3 years ago, in her own house, for something he had done. I thought about Claire's voice the night I confronted her. Calm, almost relieved, like the secret had been heavier than the marriage. I thought about all the evenings, the dinners, the kids running between the tables, the ordinary life that I had built and believed in and tended like something real. It was real. That was the thing I kept coming back to, sitting there in the dark. It had been real to me, and real things, when they are taken from you, leave real weight. You do not just decide to stop feeling it. You carry it. You carry it while you make lunches and help with homework and answer emails and stand in your own garage handing a ladder to the man who broke everything. But here's what I also knew. I was not someone who had done this to them. I had shown up. I had been present. I had done the debate prep and the campaign materials and the Thanksgiving dinners and the decade of ordinary effort that a life together requires. I had not been perfect. No one is. But I had been honest, and I had been there, and I had not looked my best friend in the eyes and lied while his children played in the next room. They had done that. And now he was standing in my garage telling me I needed to think about my role. I sat there until the neighbors' lights went off. The yard. The lesson I took from all of it is this. People who count on your silence to protect their lies are always shocked when you stop being silent. Was I wrong to do what I did, or did they get exactly what they earned? Let me know in the comments. Was that wrong? Was I too calculated, too cold, too precise for someone who was supposed to be grieving? Or did two people who spent months lying to the faces of the people who trusted them most simply get exactly what they had built toward all along? Tell me what you think. I read every single one of your responses. And right now, going through what I'm going through, that matters more than you know.